This session, you've read the introduction in the brochure, but I thought Joseph Ramonada's talk this morning provided the ideal introduction to the next panel on contested histories. In the face of tired definitions of museums, weighted down by the fatigue of too much history and the suppression of historic injustices, he said that we need to ask, how much reality can museums actually face? Can we really tell the truth? And if we do surface the truth, can we go further and enable creative experiences, not just creative experiences in art or the humanities or science, but the creative experiences needed to renew democracy? So the question underlying all the 4 museums in this panel, or 3 at the moment, is can museums, at last, welcome, thank you. Can museums help nurture citizens who, as Joseph said, in Kant's terms, can they learn to think for themselves and become active citizens? So I will introduce the speakers and then hand over to the first museum. I will introduce the speakers when I can find the page. So we have Nayat Karakoze, who's director of the Hrant Dink Site of Memory. We have Dr. Gundala Bavanman, director of the Documentation Center for Displacement, Expulsion and Reconciliation. We have Christoph Stein, director, and Miriam Varadinis from the Art Museum in Zurich. And we have Daniel Micharek and Klaus Mohr from the Sudeten-German Museum. So we're going to start with Nayat, and I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and being surrounded by this wonderful community. Today, I'll be presenting you 23.5 Hrant Dink Site of Memory, which is located in Istanbul, Turkey. Before embarking to our memory site, I would like to start with Hrant Dink. Hrant Dink was an Armenian who was born in Turkey. From the very young age, he was very much engaged in the Armenian community. He was aware of the problems of the community. At the same time, he was a leftist, he was a human rights defender, and an agent of change. In 1996, together with his friends, he took a very brave step and he established Agos newspaper. Agos was a turning point for the minorities and for the Armenians in Turkey, as it was the first newspaper to be published both in Turkish and in Armenian during the Republican era. With the efforts of the newspaper and Hrant Dink, the Armenian question, the problems of minorities started to enter into the public agenda. Minorities found an invaluable platform to express themselves, and they were very vocal and visible through the efforts of the newspaper. At the same time, the newspaper reminded that minorities in Turkey are in fact an integral part of the culture that forms Turkey today. But unfortunately, over the course of time, Hrant Dink became a target, especially after publishing the news story about Sabiha Gökçen, who is one of the adopted daughters of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and at the same time, she's the first woman war pilot in the world. In that news story, the newspaper revealed that she was in fact an Armenian orphan from 1950. This created a huge backlash in Turkey. Many people couldn't accept the fact that she could be an Armenian. He was targeted by nationalist group, he was threatened, he was subject of hate speech in the media and smear campaigns. And he was also threatened by some public officers, and even the head of the general staff, military, they issued a statement criticizing him and calling people to take action. So after 3 years of this targeting process, he was killed right in front of the newspaper office in Istanbul on January 19th during the daytime. From that night on, the newspaper office became an important site of conscience. The assassination evoked people's conscience. Hundreds of thousands of people walked in the streets of Istanbul shouting out, "We are all Hrant Dink, we are all Armenian." It was a walk of sorrow, but at the same time, it was a walk of solidarity and hope. Hrant Dink Foundation was established a few months after the assassination of Hrant Dink to continue his legacy and his dreams about equality, his dreams about peace, about justice, about democracy. And both the foundation and the newspaper continued operating from the Sabat building until 2015. And in 2015, when we decided to move to a different place, we decided to turn this important venue into a memory site, as we were aware of its powerful presence in the collective memory and collective conscience of the society. So after 4 years of preparation, we opened the doors of 23.5 Hrant Dink Site of Memory in Istanbul on 23rd of April 2019. Well, I will brief you about the name of the 23.5, why we do call it. 23.5 name is inspired by one of Hrant Dink's articles called 23.5 April. In that article, Hrant Dink was describing his feelings in between 23rd of April, which is a day that the Turkish parliament was established. It's a day of sovereignty, and at the same time, it's a holiday dedicated to the children of the world. And the following day, 24th of April, is a very painful day for all Armenians in the world, and especially Armenians in Turkey, as it's the start day of the Armenian genocide. Hrant Dink was describing his feelings between the pain of the past and the hope for the future. And in that article, he was making a call, saying that if it's a holiday dedicated to the children of the world, invite children from Armenia as well. Maybe they can solve this problem. This vision in this article very much resonated with our mission as well, as we wanted to build a bridge between the pain of the past and hope for the future. In our memory site, which is the first memory site in Turkey, we shed light on Hrant Dink's life, his struggle, the story of the newspaper, the events that led to his assassination, and the aftermath of assassination. Hrant Dink is the main narrator himself. He's guiding our visitors through the exhibit. And it's a site of dialogue that doesn't talk to people, but talks with people. Most importantly, it promotes the universal values embraced by Hrant Dink, such as democracy, human rights, justice, coexistence, equality. It has several functions. It's a site of remembrance as we shed light on the minority past and the past regarding Armenians in Turkey, that multicultural past that is sometimes overlooked and totally dismissed. It's a site of truth-seeking as step by step we show how this murder was orchestrated, which actors were involved in this murder. It's a site of expression and also a site of communication as we allocate spaces for our visitors so that they can register and express their thoughts, opinions about hope, human rights, justice, equality. And at the same time, they're able to video record their own stories, because we know that it's the stories that create special and strong bonds with us. And it's the stories, personal stories, that foster empathy and mutual understanding. If memory sites, if remembering is a form of resisting, can we be agents of change through remembering? Because we view 23.5 as a site of activism and at the same time as a site of justice seeking. Still, on each January 19, thousands of people gather in front of the newspaper office and the memory site to commemorate Hrant Dink and to demand justice. Unfortunately, although there were many convicted people in the assassination trial, the real perpetrators behind the murder, they have never been brought to justice. No effective investigation was conducted. So our quest for justice is continuing through 23.5. And with its archives of the newspaper and assassination trial folders, it's a site of learning and resource as well. And while building the site, we also thought about how we can curate between the pain of the past and hope for the future. It's a site of reflection, it's a site of commemoration, where people can contemplate about the past. It's about harnessing our pain into power and creating treasure out of our pain. And we run a lot of public programs with the youth, with adults, so that we can build their skills, so that they have a deeper understanding of democracy, human rights, equality, and freedoms. Hrant Dink once said, "We are the people seeking to turn the hell we live into heaven." We know that in four corners of the world, there are amazing people who are trying to do whatever they can do to enlighten the darkness, to turn the hells they live into heaven. And 23½ will act as a space to empower these people and to encourage people to become agents of change. Now I'm finishing with our video, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Thank you for that. Human rights are only meaningful if they're universal. And this museum is dedicated to one man, one person from a very specific ethnic group. So how do you connect this story with universal human rights and the struggles of other groups, both within Turkey and internationally, for human rights?
Hrant Dink, yes, he was an Armenian, but first and most importantly, he was a true democrat, an agent of change, and his only problem was not only the problem of Armenians or minorities in Turkey, because he was a fervent defender of democratization of Turkey, and he was always defending that if we give all the rights of minorities and Armenians in Turkey, if there's not a still democratic country, that wouldn't mean a lot. So when we review his articles and we go through all of his videos, we see that what kind of a true democrat he was, because he was writing about this many important topics that still our country is dealing with 20 years ago. It still resonates with Turkey. And also, if we take this exhibit to South Africa, let's say, the values he defended still will resonate there and in four corners of the world. So we wanted to shed light, most importantly, yes, on one hand, it is his life, but at the same time, how can we promote democracy, equality, justice, and coexistence and freedoms in Turkey? And we are trying to also enrich on this side, not only with the exhibits, but to build the skills, especially of the youth, with learning and youth programs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gundula.
Hello, I'm Gundula Bavendam from Berlin, and I would like to ask the technicians to start with a film about the documentation center, please.
Das Dokumentationszentrum Flucht, Vertreibung, Versöhnen. Es liegt in unmittelbarer Nähe zum Potsdamer Platz, zum Martin-Gropius-Bau und zu der Topographie des Terrors. Das Dokumentationszentrum ist Deutschlands erster und einziger Lern- und Erinnerungsort, der Zwangsmigrationen in Geschichte und Gegenwart ins Zentrum stellt. Die ständige Ausstellung beleuchtet politisch, ethnisch und religiös begründete Zwangsmigrationen im 20. Jahrhundert in Europa und darüber hinaus. Bei uns lernen Besucherinnen und Besucher, warum bis heute unzählige Menschen fliehen müssen oder vertrieben werden, welche Erfahrungen sie auf ihren Wegen machen, was der Verlust der Heimat für sie bedeutet und welche Schwierigkeiten sie haben, wenn sie in einem anderen Land Aufnahme finden. Im ersten Teil der Ausstellung im ersten Obergeschoss dienen 6 Themeninseln als Einführung und Überblick. Hier geht es um die Ursachen, Phänomene und Folgen von Zwangsmigrationen allgemein. Der zweite Teil der Ausstellung behandelt Flucht und Vertreibung der Deutschen im historischen Kontext des Zweiten Weltkrieges und der nationalsozialistischen Politik. Besucherinnen und Besucher haben die Möglichkeit, sich zu beteiligen. Sie können ihre Meinung äußern, ihre eigenen Fluchtwege oder die ihrer Familie eingeben oder mithilfe des Audioguides über Themen abstimmen, Installationen und Videos auslösen. Schulklassen und Gruppen können verschiedene Führungen und Workshops buchen. Die Bibliothek im ersten Obergeschoss bietet aktuelle Forschungs- und Fachliteratur zu den Themen Flucht, Vertreibung und Zwangsmigrationen weltweit sowie Erinnerungsliteratur, Belletristik, Kinder- und Jugendbücher. An den Medienstationen im Lesesaal und im Wandelgang finden Besucherinnen und Besucher Zugang zu dem Zeitzeugenarchiv und der Oral History Sammlung. Hier stehen die Geschichten und Erinnerungen der Menschen im Zentrum. Im Veranstaltungssaal im Erdgeschoss finden Lesungen, Filmvorführungen, Vorträge und Diskussionen oder Tagungen statt. In unserem Sonderausstellungssaal werden wechselnde thematische Ausstellungen gezeigt. Der Raum der Stille schließlich bietet einen geschützten Ort der Ruhe und der Reflexion. Der Eintritt ist frei.
Thank you very much. First of all, some words of appreciation. I truly enjoy being here in the beautiful city of Barcelona, among so many prestigious colleagues from all over Europe. Although I'm the only presenter right now, everything we have achieved so far and will hopefully achieve in the future is the work of a strong and competent team I'm happy to work with. We all deeply appreciate being among the nominees for the European Museums Award 2023. Museums and Contested Histories, the title of this section, is a very good starting point to shortly reflect on the achievements of the Documentation Center for Displacement, Expulsion, Reconciliation, as well as its challenges. Our subject, the phenomenon of forced migration of many millions of people, has been contested throughout the 20th century by far, not only in Germany, but all over Europe, and it will remain controversial. Just think about the refugees from Ukraine, the largest movement since the Second World War, or the rising numbers of asylum seekers from Syria, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, hoping for protection in a European country. Not to speak of the unresolved questions of refugees from African countries in the Mediterranean. In many and rather uncomfortable ways, forced migration touches our self-image, the ambivalences of the nation-state, and the questions of our core values, human rights in particular. The German experiences of displacement and expulsion, 14 million people were affected during and at the end and after the Second World War, were particularly contested in Germany and abroad, for example in Poland or the Czech Republic, because it touches the pillars of the principles of the German national remembrance culture, notably the permanent responsibility for the crimes of our ancestors. From my perspective, our achievements since the opening are the opening of the Documentation Center Displacement, Expulsion, Reconciliation in summer 2021, with the participation of former Chancellor Angela Merkel in time and in the budget. A generally well-received narrative bridging the strong tensions and conflicts which shaped but also burdened one of the most difficult memory projects in Germany in the last decades, as the second achievement. And the third one, we had a good start with 68,000 visitors in 21-22, despite Corona, with a rising curve of groups booking guided tours or workshops from our educational program. Our challenges are the tasks of the future. And as the head of a young public institution, I'm speaking about the next 3 to 5 years. I like to think of this phase as a second foundation, not less ambitious than the former chapter of institutional history which led to the successful opening. We wish to establish the Documentation Center as a well-known and widely respected cultural brand, locally, nationally, and internationally, by creative and sustainable means. On a very competitive field, I have to admit, notably in Berlin, where many, many museums on history exist, and many of them since many years. We aim for attracting, developing, and engaging a diverse audience, bridging generations and different cultures, thus offering the possibility for mutual understanding and even reconciliation. Last but not least, we take the responsibility to represent and preserve a unique position in our national remembrance culture, as I said, commemorating German refugees and expellees with the same empathy as all others being affected by this hardship, being aware of the German crimes of the past, especially the Holocaust. And I'm a little bit before time, but I think that's not dramatic.
No, you're not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No, you were perfectly on time, because I want to say to the technicians and to the audience, there's a countdown clock here, so speakers can be really stressed and watch them seconds ticking off. But I want to say to the technicians, the countdown starts with the film, not when the speaker starts. That's the confusion.
Okay.
So you were very good. I just wanted, you don't mind if I sit, is that? I wanted to ask about reconciliation. That seemed to me very interesting. In what you've just said, you expressed it as a kind of hope. But do you actively work at generating reconciliation, and who is being reconciled with whom?
It's one of the most important questions you could raise, I think, and many raise these questions to us. We have the term in our name, and it's definitely not a program or an expectation, but rather the potential and the hope, as you said. And we would like to offer the space where this can happen, but we also have techniques to support reconciliation. And I think the main practice is linking spaces, linking objects, and linking people who formerly were separated, forcibly separated, by displacement and expulsion. So the practice of linking, to bring those people together again, to bring different opinions together, to discuss, to offer, for example, the older generation in Germany to come to our museum and see the objects they donated to us, to offer them to research about their family history in former German territories. I'm now strongly talking and speaking about the Germans, but we are also a universal museum, and the whole first part of the permanent exhibit is dedicated to the European history of forced migration in the 20th century up to our days. So maybe a part of the answer, I think of reconciliation on 3 levels. It can be individual, to come to terms, for example, with your personal fate, to acknowledge the fate of the others. It can be on a national level, so the whole German society really battled for the project I was talking about and I'm responsible for. It was a process of reconciliation, in a way, in Germany, around the subject. And the third level is the international level. I was very happy and very glad that no critical voices, for example, from Poland, came in the summer of 1921, because I think we found a narrative which is also acceptable in those countries who suffered by Germany in the Second World War. Thank you.
You're on.
Imagine you have 20 minutes to pack your whole life into one rucksack. This is what all people experience who are displaced from their homeland. Since 2020, Munich has been home to a museum that explores this issue in depth. The Sudeten German Museum presents more than 1,000 years of history in around 900 objects in its 1,200 square meter exhibition space. The permanent collection mainly deals with the history and culture of Germans and Czechs in the historical Bohemian lands, what is now the Czech Republic. The multilingual presentation explores this history from multiple perspectives. Museum visitors are greeted by the Queen of Europe, an allegorical map. Her heart represents the Kingdom of Bohemia in the center of Europe, which, along with Moravia and Silesia, forms the historical Bohemian lands. Both Germans and Slav Czechs made their home there and shared the same rulers. Some inhabitants, especially in cities in the heartlands, adopted the language and customs of the other side. Germans turned Czech and Czechs turned German. But an invisible language border ran along the mountain ranges. The cultural lives of both Germans and Czechs were shaped by religious traditions such as Easter and Christmas, with only minor differences. The museum holds several nativity scenes or Christmas crypts that illustrate this very well. Two bicycles, one branded Slavia and one branded Germania, symbolize the national tensions between Germans and Czechs, which increased steadily in the 20th century. Nationalism gripped all levels of society. The First World War meant the end of the multinational state of Austria-Hungary. A computer animation illustrates the transformation from monarchy to republic. The newly established Czechoslovak Republic was created without the involvement of its German inhabitants, who now referred to themselves as Sudetengermans. Their desire for independence was ignored. Election placards for German parties show the beginnings of democratic participation, which was soon undone by the global economic crisis. The Sudetengermans were hit harder than the Czech population. They felt abandoned by the state. Election placards show their increasing radicalization. The Sudetengermans succumbed to false hope, believing they would be able to live freely as Germans in National Socialist Germany, but they did not escape the repressive measures of the NS regime. Most did not foresee the catastrophic consequences. A pair of binoculars from a Jewish optician who was murdered in a concentration camp stands in for the victims of the Shoah. A dramatic installation of floating objects demonstrates what it means to lose one's homeland. 1946 saw the systematic mass expulsion of 3 million Sudetengermans. They were transported to barracks and then removed from the country. Their luggage was inspected and valuable objects were confiscated. The Sudetengerman Museum owns 2 porcelain cups that were part of a wedding china set. The young wife hid the set in a quilt during the expulsion. However, an inspector discovered the porcelain and threw the quilt to the ground. Only 2 cups survived. Barracks were the last stop in the homeland and the first chapter in the expellees' new lives. The new arrivals were not welcome at first, but most Sudetengermans quickly found work and a place to live. They maintained their traditions, such as their native cuisine. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, Sudetengermans were once again able to visit their old homeland. Sudetengermans and Czechs came together and started to plan joint projects. Many expellees have donated personal mementos to the Sudetengerman Museum, among them the 2 surviving porcelain cups. The museum now holds more than 50,000 objects, which are carefully catalogued and stored. Each one of them tells a story. Researchers study the historical context and communicate their findings to the public. The Sudetengerman Museum is a dynamic place of encounter, an encounter with an important chapter of European history, and, more importantly, a place where Germans and Czechs can come together. In this way, the museum contributes towards a peaceful coexistence in Europe based on democratic freedom and respect for human rights. The Sudetengerman Museum reminds all the people who have to leave their homeland, and therefore it is more important than ever. Thank you.
Is it on now? Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to think what your museum stands for. And I'm wondering, would you say it makes a statement that Sudetengermans are still here? Or is it more like the previous museum saying there were displaced people in the past, and you're connecting it with all the displaced people all over the world as an example of displacement, or is it much more about the singular history of the Sudetens?
It shows a chapter, a very dark chapter of European history, but also of local history of Munich, because the Munich Agreement was like the beginning of very big nationalist, social nationalist problems. It was for sure one example of history, but I think many people can refer to this history because expulsions, they are taking place. Unfortunately, it's still going on. And even if you don't have this Sudeten German roots, which is probably very common in Bavaria, we have a few levels, and the first level is describe the homeland, like the more or less 600 years of peaceful living.
Yes, everybody
together.
looked very happy in the homeland, even the sheep.
And then later on, of course, the nationalism came up in Europe, and especially with a very dark chapter of National Socialism, which separated those two peoples, two nations who used to live together for such a long time.
Great. Thank you very much. Do you want to add anything?
Additionally, I can tell you that we tried to demonstrate this theme from different perspectives. We tried to enlighten it from Czech point, from German point, and we also have the fate of the other minorities in this country. They are the Roma, the Jews. They all were shown there, and from this, our museum concentrates on the relationship of Germans and Czechs, but it can be seen in a wider context of European minorities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Miriam and I are very happy to be able to present you some insights of Kunsthaus Zurich today. This is Anne de Meester, the new artistic director of Kunsthaus Zurich. At the moment she's in New York, so we had the pleasure to replace her in Barcelona. To tell you a little secret, we made a little game. I was talking to her who was more in Barcelona in his life so far. She was 4 times here, I was 40 times here, so it was me who was able to come here. Some facts about Kunsthaus Zurich. If you want, Kunsthaus Zurich Foundation was a democratic movement. Back in 1787, there was artists, collectors, and people interested in art who gathered in Zurich to make first steps of founding a museum. The first opening was 1910 with architect Karl Moser. The last opening was back in 2021 with David Chipperfield with a new huge building of Kunsthaus Zurich. We have a total budget. With this extension, we doubled the size. We are the biggest art museum of Switzerland now. We have a total budget of 27 million Swiss francs or euros a year. What is very special for us, we have a public subsidy which is less than 50%. So we have to earn a lot of money to finance our business, like ticketing revenue, membership fees, and other things. With the new building, we made a huge step in terms of sustainability. It's really an ecological building with 98% of recycled concrete and a big range of sustainable energy mix. This is a view to the new building of David Chipperfield. Some of you may know that David Chipperfield last year got the Oscar of the most important architect in the world, and we are very happy that he made the latest building of Kunsthaus Zurich. This is a view of the entrance hall. It's an amazing entrance hall. And this is a view of on the other side of the street, the old buildings of Kunsthaus Zurich. There you see all architectures involved, from Chipperfield to Moser, and under the street we have a direct connection between the two museum buildings. Some achievements we made with the big opening. We are very proud that we could self-finance 43% of the whole building by private donors. As you may know, Switzerland is a direct democracy, so it's very important that you have also private money, because the public, the people, have to vote for these huge buildings. We have a huge increase in visitors. We almost doubled the size, more than 500,000 now, back last year. And we also have, thanks God, a huge increase in ticketing. Some business challenge we face at the moment. For all of you who are planning an extension, please make sure that you have a realistic business plan. We still suffer today. We are in a huge change process. We doubled the size. And I have to tell you that the costs were calculated too low and the income budget were calculated too high, which is a little bit a problem. Maintaining the self-financing is quite difficult for us because we have to run two huge museum entrances now, and this is kind of inefficient in practice. Then we face some problems in sponsoring and fundraising. It's getting more and more difficult to really find good sponsors who are not problematic, who are really good companies, sustainable and things like that. And it's quite difficult for us to make huge investments in the future. Also with digitalization, I don't have to tell you, you have to make a huge effort to finance digitalization, but if you integrated it in the organization, it costs you every day also for the future. And I think that's a huge challenge for all of us. With this colorful picture of Pippi Lottirist, I want to hand over to my charming colleague Miriam. Thank you.
Turn on, thank you, this mic. Okay, my name is Miriam Varadinis and I'm a curator for contemporary art in the Kunsthaus. And what you see here is one of the new works that have been commissioned for the new building by Pippi Lottirist. She's a famous Swiss artist, as you might know, working with video mainly. And here she created an installation that is called Pixel Forest, and it's actually a kind of a forest of like lights, 2,000 lights, and but it's as if a screen would have been exploded into pixels, and it's actually a video that she sends on to these lamps, and it becomes like a completely immersive and mesmerizing environment that is also part of one of the private collections that entered the museum. With the new building, there's a kind of a new era that started also when it comes to the presentation of the collection, and especially also contemporary art and also video and new media presentations as the one of Pippi Lotti. What we also created is a permanent space for the Dada collection. The Dada movement started in Zurich 1916, and we wanted to give this kind of rebellious energy also a permanent presence in the museum. And of course we also have a new space for temporary exhibitions that offers new possibilities for also like in exhibition making. As Christoph already said, we're like the largest museum now in Switzerland, and now we also come, let's say, to the contested histories. We have added 3 private collections to the museum. The Kunsthaus has always grown thanks to private collections that have been donated to the museum. And so this has been an ongoing process since the beginning of the Kunsthaus. And we have 3 of those. One is Hubert Loser, which is amazing collection of a couple, and he Werner Merzbacher, a couple, and Werner Merzbacher, he was sent as a kid. He's Jewish, and he was sent as a kid on a train for refugees to Switzerland, and he survived the Holocaust thanks to this train that brought him to Switzerland. And for him, art has always been, let's say, a source for life and inspiration. And so he wanted to give the collection back to a Swiss museum, thank also for his own experience. On the other end, we have the Emil Bürle collection, which some of you might have heard of. There's been a huge, let's say, controversy about this collection because the collector has been a weapon producer, an arm dealer, and he made his money with that industry by selling weapons to Nazi, to the Korean War, to whomever he could to make profit of. And so now one, let's say, of the big challenges is also how to deal, let's say, with this conflicted history, the provenance history, and how to present that contested history in the museum. We're running already out of time, so I just say a few other challenges. Of course, we have, let's say, the gender equality issue that we, as a historical museum, it's very difficult to, let's say, to reach a 50-50 percentage of women artists represented in the collection and men, but we're working very hard also on that. And of course, the issue of decolonization of the museum and sustainability, both in an ecological but also in a social sense. So let's say the Kunsthaus for us should not just be, let's say, a temple for the arts, but also, as Josep Ramoneda said this morning, a real place, like a center for curiosity and also a real place for encounter and experience. As now Anne de Meester was appointed as the new director of Kunsthaus, she actually chose really to approach this history of Bürle very proactively, and we have been working hard on a new strategy for provenance research, which actually really opts for this proactive approach, and where we also are installing an international commission and committee to help us on this issue. Yes, I'm finishing. Just some views, let's see, of how we add also the artist voice into the collection, how we add also contemporary artists to reflect on colonial issues or on gender issues as you see here. I'm done.
Okay. So thank you all very much. We're running behind time because you all stayed a long time on your coffee. So I'm going to come and take up the microphone. So yeah. So I suppose I have a question for all of you because you've all taken on quite difficult social interventions. So what I want to ask is, if you think of your museum in 10 years' time, 5 years, 10 years is too long, and you think your museum has been very successful, what would that success look like? And how would you know? How would you measure, or how would you capture that success? So, the characters. Do you want to start? You have the microphone.
I think for us it will be a big success factor that we are still a very relevant institution in society, that we manage to still people bringing to our institution, like with the authenticity of the original objects, not to fly over to everybody's at home at a computer and consumes the artworks at home. To be this center of curiosity, that people come to us, ask questions, get answers, discuss together. That would be, for me, the main success factors, also in 10 years.
You want to?
Yes, I think it's that the museum is kind of a place where where important issues of our times are being negotiated, are being discussed, and are being also like put in a dialogue with the past and the future, basically. So I think that's when we are able to reach out and to bringing also people that now maybe are not coming into this museum, because there's still this kind of threshold of maybe education and also social background. So if we manage, let's say, to tear down these barriers and bring in a wider audience and other communities of society, I think then we are still relevant, and I would describe this as successful.
Great. Gundula.
Thank you. I spoke about our plans already, but I would say in numbers, we would like to have at least 100,000 visitors per year. That's maybe achievable until then. In terms of quality of outreach, we would like to be the first address, at least in Germany, better in Europe, which comes to mind if you think about forced migration. So really to be the leading institution for that. And in terms of quality, maybe that everybody who comes to us and experiences the different ways of connecting with the subject leaves with an idea of reconciliation can mean.
Great. Okay, thank you.
With our memory side, we want to contribute to the culture of dealing with the past, coexistence, and it would be a success if the mindsets of people, our visitors, has changed, transformed, especially youth, to embrace a culture of diversity, multiculturalism, and be more open to different cultures, minority groups, and vulnerable groups. Because from the very beginning, we defend coexistence, the importance of this. If we can coexist together and respect each other's identities. So through our learning programs, if we have even more, let's say, visitors from youth, but we want to work with schools in Turkey, not only in Istanbul, but in different cities of Turkey, to build the skills of youth so that they can act in compliance with a rights-based approach. That would be a success.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally?
On the one hand, the Sudeten-German Museum would like to interact more with communities, with local communities, for example, like with artists or with schools. But on the other hand, of course, we want to document the stories which are told by the expellees, which are getting even less and less. And while we are getting objects for the depot, we don't get, as mentioned in the presentation, just the objects. Like, we also want to document the stories behind each object. And furthermore, so first of all, the contemporary witness, we want to document their statements and objects. And maybe my colleague wants to continue.
Yes, we are collecting the knowledge of the expellees who still are surviving. In 10 years, they will not be among us, but then our museum is a chance to make the understanding of the following generations for the importance of human dignity and freedom in Europe.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Human dignity and freedom in Europe sounds like a good place to end. But before we finish for lunch, can I have the next slide, please, about the EMYA book? So I want to steal a few minutes of your time for a commercial presentation and advertising opportunity. Okay, is that working? I'm not paranoid. We've been trying to find a way of capturing the wisdom of EMYA. Since 1977, there have been juries visiting, I think nearly 1,500 museums have been visited across Europe in those years, and they've all been reported on and discussed. So we were trying to think how we could capture some of that insight and wisdom, and we were inspired by Museums of Influence by Kenneth Hudson, our founder. It was published in 1984, and it's a historical work. It's about the archetypal art museum, the archetypal natural history museum, open air museum, and so on. We decided we didn't want to do a history book in that kind of systematic way. We wanted to capture the spirit of EMYA, where every year the standards are discussed in the two-day jury meeting, and the 10, 12, 14 people have to decide on the basis of the museums who have applied which is the best. There's no checklist, there's no best practice examples. It has to be worked out every year. So in the end, we decided to create this book. Jette Sandow, Marilyn Mullio, and I invited 13 past judges right from the very beginning, people who were there with Kenneth Hudson in 1977 up to the present. And we asked them to write about the museums that were most memorable for them. Some of them didn't even win prizes because the jury can make mistakes. So they made a list of over 200 suggestions, and from those, the three of us doing the editing selected 50 museums. Next slide, please. Which they covered the spread in time from the very first winners through types of museum, through geography across the whole of Europe, from the far east of Russia to the far west of Europe. So the book is a distillation or a version of the wisdom and soul of EMYA over the past 40-something years. Next slide, please. And because we love EMYA in participants, the cover price of €40 will be reduced just for this conference to €32, and Jette and I will happily sign them for no extra fee. And I should say that buying a copy of the book will have no influence on whether you get a prize or not. So before we finish for lunch, I would now like you to thank our participants in this panel for their very interesting presentation. Thank you all very much.